Our next speaker is here, Sugoto. Welcome in.
Hello.
Hi there. How you doing today?
Fine. It's a rainy day, so what a better way to explore biodiversity than actually on screen and with other people like yourself.
That's the spirit. Well, we're certainly keep on rolling with again 50 speakers in 3 days. We just finished up with Eunice in Singapore. Where are you joining from? That it's rainy, by the way.
So it's Switzerland. I'm just not that far from Geneva at the moment.
Fantastic. I think you're our second Swiss speaker in the last 2 days, so it's nice to be back in Europe, and I'm excited to dive in. Are you ready for a little bit of an introduction before we get going?
Yeah, go for it.
Fantastic. Well, before we dive in on the individual topic, just a few housekeeping notes for people tuning in at home. We've got people tuning in from all over the world for our last presentation. Again, China, Portugal, France, Germany, Canada, US, and more. So we so appreciate you joining us for our Global BioFest. We're encouraging people to share pictures of backyard bio with hashtag backyard bio. So whatever creatures you might find, whether they be insects or more charismatic, larger birds, mammals, etc., we'd love to see those on our social media pages. And this program, while it's free for everyone all around the world, we are using it as a fundraiser. So if everyone who tuned in yesterday for our program donated just $2, we would get to our $10,000 goal, all in support of some amazing conservation partners of ours, several of whom are doing talks with us today. But the reason you guys are all here now is for our speaker. So we are joined live in Switzerland by Sugoto Roy, and he is going to talk today about his role as the IUCN's Tiger Program Manager in ensuring tiger conservation, particularly with regards to connecting conservation with communities. So this is something that we have been highlighting all BioFest long, and it's this, essential interlinked nature of human settlements, human communities, populations, and the natural habitat around them. They're inseparable from one another, and we're going to learn a little bit about what that means with regards to one of the most charismatic species of tigers. So, Sugoto, thanks so much for joining us, and take us away.
Okay, so hello everyone from around the world. It's a strange setup because I can't get feedback from people, but I know people are watching, so hello. My name's Sugoto Roy. I work for IUCN, and as you said, I'm running IUCN's Tiger Program. So first of all, somehow I've already got to the end of this slide. Spoiler alert.
There has to, yeah.
Okay.
Shield your eyes. There you go.
Okay, there we go. So basically, we're going to talk about tigers conservation, and working in large landscapes. What do we need to do to make large landscape scale projects work? So first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my program. It's funded through the German government, the Ministry for German Cooperation, through the German Development Bank, which is KfW. And initially it was a 6-year program. It's now going to continue for a little while longer. And it's got a number of aims, but the key word I said already is development. It's a development bank. It's a development source of funding. So keep that in mind as I give my talk. And we look at a number of things. We're looking at how tigers can coexist with human beings in complicated, complex landscapes, while we still carry out sensible conservation actions. There is a long and strong community focus in what we do. And at the moment, we've got 12 projects ranging from €500,000 to 2.6 million euros. So each of those projects are actually quite large. And some of these projects work across transboundaries. So they work along the border, for example, between India and Nepal or India and Bhutan. But at the moment, we are working across 6 tiger range countries with our projects. So this is where we work. The yellow dots are where we have projects. We've got projects in southern and central India. We've got projects on the India-Bangladesh border. As I said, we've got 2 projects on the India-Nepal border, 1 project in Bhutan, 1 just across the border in Assam, and another one on the India-Myanmar border. And then the other 2 we have in Myanmar itself and also in Sumatra. So each of these projects are massive projects in their own right, with a huge amount of information and work going on. Give you a brief background into cats, though anyone who's watching this program has probably been looking at tiger pictures and going, wow, amazing thing. So everyone probably knows all of this already, but it's the largest of the cats we have. It can be up to 300 kilos, a really big adult male, 3 meters including the tail, they love water. Tigers actually evolved in cold climates. They don't really do particularly well in arid areas. The most arid place they probably live in is Rajasthan, but it's Ranthambore, which is full of lakes and stuff. But they'll never go into desert areas, for example, very frequently. And they require a lot of space. The space that they require is dictated by a combination of different factors, but mostly it's the availability of prey. If your things that you are hunting and eating, are at high density, you don't need to travel very far to eat to get what you need food-wise. And for males also, their ranging behavior, their moving behavior is dictated by the availability of mates and females and stuff in the landscape. So males want to find as many females as possible to mate with. On average, the tiger needs a cow a week, or the equivalent of a cow a week in terms of the amount of meat it needs. So that's just a very crude sum. There's a lot of debate raging about their taxonomy. Are there 6 subspecies left alive? Are there 9 subspecies originally? Genetics have said there's 2 subspecies, but at the same time, people are still arguing about how many subspecies they are, whether the Chinese tiger, which is now extinct actually, is the same as the Bengal tiger, etc., etc. Actually, it doesn't really matter. What we really need to focus on first and foremost is looking at tigers in the landscapes that they do occur in and conserving them there. Tigers occur now in about 6% of their original range. That's a huge decrease in their distribution. There are 13 what we call tiger range countries that have tigers. 4 of them have had no evidence of tigers for some decades. So, I mean, in terms of actual disappearance of a species, this loss of presence is noticeable. It's really shrunk. The main threats we have is land clearance for logging for wood, but also farming and stuff like that. And also production of things like oil palm in places like Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. There are people grazing in tiger habitats. They collect firewood, and there's large infrastructure projects. Countries are developing, and they're building roads and rail networks. So habitats are being increasingly felled for various reasons. And also the habitat that does exist, this is a protected area, this is an actual tiger reserve in India, are seriously overgrazed, which puts tigers under a lot of pressure. They're already finding it hard to find food in terms of natural prey, and then they're tempted by things like this, which leads to a lot of poaching. People are going into tiger habitats. Tiger poaching is a very complicated business. There's a lot of people ordering tigers not online, but ordering tiger parts through various chains and networks, criminal gangs. They're contacting tribes with actual poaching traditions where they live, and it's very hard to actually try and put a lid on poaching. You have to deal with it at every step of this chain, especially in the landscape, but then follow the trade all the way through the landscapes as they occur. And why are people poaching tigers? It's mostly for the traditional Chinese medicine market. Every part of a tiger is used somehow, somewhere, all the way from, if you've got a toothache, tiger whiskers may help you with that. If you're lazy or a little bit, or have pimples, tiger brain tissue might help you with that. None of this is proven. It doesn't really work, but at the same time, people think they do, and this is now driven the poaching for tiger parts. Human wildlife conflicts, wherever people go into tiger dominated landscapes or tigers move into human landscapes, there are fatalities. Tigers are big animals. There's no way you can fight them off and just walk away with a wound. You will probably die. Tigers also kill livestock, and people kill tigers in return. As I said, tigers need the equivalent of a cow a week. So that's a lot of prey. And where you have people grazing excessively and natural prey numbers are shrinking, then you have no other option. Sometimes tigers do just turn to livestock. So people kill a lot of tigers. They catch them through snares. Sometimes people are hunting other things like wild boar, and they catch tigers in snares. But whatever happens, I mean, people catch tigers, they will do something with the body parts if they get a chance in the landscapes. The other ramifications of tiger conservation, it's quite complicated. As tigers are squeezed into smaller areas, leopards, who can, the species that can live very easily alongside people without being detected, leak into the landscape, into villages and farms. So conflicts with leopards increases. So it's not just tigers in isolation. Human wildlife conflict itself is a very complicated issue with a number of species interacting with each other and causing all kinds of problems, and people interacting back again, killing them. Okay, as we know now, zoonoses, a word that didn't really exist in the vocabulary of a lot of people, is a very serious issue. Wildlife diseases spreading into livestock and also at some, in some cases to people, may be something that's going to be more and more prevalent as people interact more and more in wild habitats with wild animals. And as cattle, for example, interact with wild prey species for grazing and water holes and things like that, there is a lot more scope for disease transfer. So this is a complicated diagram. I'm not going to go into it, but dealing with tiger conservation, you have to deal with the emergency situations like poaching, persecution, and then the middle range situations like improving prey availability, habitat quality. And in the longer term, you have to make sure that habitats are well connected. Tigers roam big distances and they need to be able to go from one habitat patch to another without crossing villages, etc. At the same time, you've got to deal with people's income. People are very poor. They are very angry when they lose farming animals, when they lose livestock. They need to eat. People need fuel, need water. They need schools, etc. So these two processes are running in parallel, and we have to manage both of those. So the Global Tiger Recovery Program was set up. The world's tiger countries got together and said, what can we do about it? And actually it was spearheaded by Leonardo DiCaprio and Vladimir Putin. And they got all the world's countries who have tigers together saying, hey, let's do something about this. Let's try and double the tiger population by the next year of the tiger, which is 2022, it's coming up. Whether we can or cannot double tigers in some countries is a debatable point, but it's a good goal. It drives politicians and funders and all kinds of different organizations to actually aim for something. So KfW decided, actually, we do a lot of work in Asia. We already fund up to 400 billion euros in Asia for development purposes. Let's put some of that money into tiger conservation. So it's one of the largest funders in the tiger conservation world. There are other people funding projects like Disney, Panthera, private donors, but this is one of the more measurable ones because they have very strict processes we have to follow when we set up and then monitor projects. We can work in all of the countries in blue. Some countries don't have international agreements with the German government, so that's why Malaysia, for example, is not included in there. Neither is China or Russia, for example, but the rest of the tiger world is. We have, don't worry too much about this, but the way we choose our projects, we have open calls for proposals. People say we want to set up a project in XYZ place. And there's all these little criteria they have to go through. Obviously, it has to be good for tigers. But the three key things here, and I'm going to come to this again and again, habitats, species, and people. There is this interaction between all three of those elements, and the projects that we set up have to be in that zone where they have an impact on people's livelihoods, the impact on species conservation and habitat protection and management. People need to work with governments. We give them project preparation grants. They go and set up big partnerships with government and other organizations so that they can fulfill all three of those criteria I mentioned. And there are a huge number of partner organizations involved. people who match fund, give additional funding, or they are project partners doing a certain part of a project on the ground. Camera trapping, working with local communities. It's very varied. We have something called an ESMS, Environmental and Social Management System, where we have, wherever we work, we can't create harm. We can't throw people out of national parks. We can't stop them having access to some of the resources that they did have access to. And this is called an ESMS. And we have to work with local communities as part and parcel of our project. So these are the three elements. All of our projects fit in that circle there between protecting tiger populations, managing their habitats, and working with local communities. These are our projects. But this is our project in central India, for example, and just to give you an idea of the scale that we're working at, the orange areas are actual formal tiger reserves, and these are the corridor areas in between. This is in Maharashtra, central India, and there's a huge program with a lot of grassroots level NGOs working with people in corridors to provide alternative incomes, ecotourism, alternative trades, so that people aren't just overly dependent on collecting firewood and grazing. And these are some of the activities we carry out. So I'm going to go from the top corner here. We provide alternative fuel. So people, instead of collecting firewood, this is a project in Karnataka. We provide LPG gas, so people don't have interactions with elephants and tigers and leopards in the landscape. And it reduces human-wildlife conflict and over-dependence on the firewood. We set up primary response teams when a tiger goes into a village. We equip and train people so that they can deal with the situation before an emergency situation escalates. We provide back garden farms. This is in the West Bengal part of the Sundarbans on the India-Bangladesh border, where people then don't have to go deep into the forest to get fish and things for their protein. They can grow what they need mostly without going into the forest. We train park rangers to carry out patrolling. We set up camera traps. In Nepal, the Nepalese army, as part of their day-to-day operations, are being trained in setting up patrolling processes. And then we have ecotourism. So this is in Indonesia. This is a project in Sumatra where people actually set up ecotourism. This project, this picture right at the bottom, it's a light where in a tea estate, which creates corridors of darkness. In well-lit areas, animals try and avoid those areas. So we create passages which are well forested and dark because the rest of the place is well lit, so that animals avoid people. So you prevent elephants and other wild species interacting with people. We've learned a lot. Small projects actually work very well. So do big projects. They all have their own individual plus points and minus points. Small projects are often very good with working with local people. They're often made up of staff from local communities. Big projects have a lot of money and capacity to carry out difficult, complicated tasks in landscapes. They often have good relationships with governments. There's all kinds of benefits to matching and partnering big organizations like WWF, for example, with smaller organizations. We try and integrate our activities. So for example, if you're setting up a farming situation and you're keeping cattle away from the forest, you might as well collect the waste material to develop biogas at the same time to provide alternative fuels, rather than having independent random activities that don't really lend themselves to working together. Don't worry about this at all, but just to give you a brief overview, the different activities are vast. Don't even bother trying to read this, but trying to get some kind of comparability between the different projects and bring together some kind of program level data is quite complicated and requires a lot of monitoring. We have, as I say, this is some signs from a project in Nepal, which is trying to slow traffic down. As I said, roads and railways are a big problem. This is some of the LPG stuff we're doing. And we we're forever traveling to, not at the moment because of coronavirus, project areas and meeting with different partners, trying to make sure that projects are doing what they said they would do. And then, as I said, they're complicated activities, lots of different activities at different projects, across the different projects, trying to get them together and trying to see how well they're doing. We can see the tiger-related activities, the green ones at the top are going quite well, the anti-poaching, the monitoring, etc. But the habitat-related activities take a little bit of time. You still have to train people in setting up different things for managing habitats properly, training staff, working with local communities. And then at the end, providing alternative resources, working with local communities. Some of these things take a little bit of time to get going. We've learned quite a lot since the program began, but we try and capture this through various publications. For example, we're looking at how to set up a tiger program or a tiger project with the different people we work with, what they've learned from this project. And we have workshops regularly with what we call grantees, the people doing projects with us on the ground, and they have ample opportunity to exchange and learn. We have a number of studies ongoing as well. We've recently completed a study on looking at how tigers use high altitude habitats, which is going to be increasingly important as climate change forces animals to move up, and lower areas are more and more flooded or less predictable. So we have to make sure that we plan for this in advance. We also, at the point of completing a study on human-wildlife conflicts, looking at how people deal with different conflict situations across our projects when tigers enter villages, or stopping interaction between people and tigers in forested areas, and how you deal with it, how you compensate, for example, or train people to set up these rapid response teams. And in the next phase, we're looking at all of the things we've missed. As I say, this project is going to continue beyond 2022. What have we missed? Where are we going geographically? And can we bring in more organizations with different skills? So this is our Tiger program. So this is me and my colleagues. This is actually the Tiger program, though. It's all of the people we work with. It's a huge number of people with different skills, social skills, mapping skills, economists, etc. So it's a very complicated situation that requires a lot of skilled people working with you. And just to finish, I borrowed this next slide from WWF. Why do we need to work with people? Well, inside that circle is where all of the tigers in the world, in the wild, live. And just to put that into perspective, there are more people living inside that circle than outside of that circle. So you have to manage the interaction between tigers and people sensibly and well, and in a way that's sustainable. So this three-pillar approach, this habitat, species, and people, you could apply it to a number of different species like elephants, for example, or lions. But when you're working at the landscape scale, you have to work with all three elements. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You can't just go off and count tigers and forget about the rest of it. Corridors are very important, especially in places like India, where you've got good habitat patches, but they need to be connected. And you need to keep your eye on that space, that circle in between those three overlapping circles that I showed you earlier. So I think that's where I end my talk. I hope I'm on time, and I thank everybody for inviting me to this thing. I realize there's thousands of people online, so hi, everybody. There we go.
Well, thank you so much for a really inspiring presentation. I think that's about as comprehensive as you can get in highlighting work being done in tiger conservation in a 20-minute time window. So we really appreciate that. If you'd like to come out of screen share, actually, it would be great to be able to share some questions with you where we see you. That would be awesome.
Okay, how can I?
You're perfect. You're good.
Okay,
yep.
good.
You mentioned people tuning in from all over the world. So right now, a shout out to India, United Arab Emirates, Ireland, Chile, and South Africa. We've got people tuning in from all those countries, as well as our usual Canada, US, UK. In fact, we had double the number of viewers with an instant of starting your presentation. People are really vested in tigers, and I think that is something that is pretty much universal in conservation around the world. Sugoto, my first question I want to ask was regards to this Nepalese army helping with some of the work that you're doing. Now, patrols and enforcement is a huge part of ensuring that these species are protected. And again, you mentioned Vladimir Putin and Leo DiCaprio working together and bringing this together. So people are vested in tigers. Is there a way to get more military groups, large-scale community organizations involved in doing these actions so that you don't need to have, outside help coming in to facilitate this so often?
I think that's the key. I think most countries have their own nature reserves or national park systems with patrolling staff already in there. And it's just a case of making sure that these people are trained not just in the techniques of patrolling, in their field skills, in setting up camera traps, etc. But also they need additional skills in terms of working with local communities, because winning over local communities is actually the key here. But at the same time, making sure that anti-poaching patrols are effective. I mean, the gangs we're dealing with are criminal gangs who are well armed. And you need well-armed, well-trained people in law enforcement who follow security protocols, but also human rights protocols, law enforcement processes, SOPs, etc. So it's a fine balance in doing law enforcement in a way that you stop criminality, but at the same time not abusing it in a sense that you're not scaring or terrorizing, for another word, local communities.
Yeah. From the threats that are facing tigers to the huge variety of solutions that are being enacted by your group and around the world to protect them, it's a very, very complicated conservation story with tigers. And so for people that are tuning in at home, are there signs of hope? Are there things that are happening that, either in the short term or that we see down the road in the next 10 years that really point to either an uptick, a doubling of tigers in some of those countries you mentioned, or anything that we can share?
So in some of the countries, tiger populations are increasing. If left alone with enough prey and habitat, tiger populations will grow, as long as they're left alone and they have some females to breed, and populations are at a minimum threshold where they can interact and mate, etc.
Yeah.
So that's not the issue. The issue is actually ensuring this habitat connectivity, etc., making sure tigers can get back to places where they used to be. And places like Bhutan are currently doing fantastic work. Nepal is they've shown massive growth in populations. Parts of India have shown tiger population increases. But I think it's important, tiger populations as a whole, but it's not something we should get hung up on its own. We need to ensure that tigers maintain viable and functional populations across their landscape, and that they recover in parts of the range where they are currently absent or at very low populations. That's the key, is to make sure they can go back to places they used to be, not just have really high densities in a plus minus way.
Right. Well, I'm really happy to hear that there are some really good success stories. That's fantastic. So you mentioned again, there's such a huge portion of the world's population in this area with all the world's tigers, but there are so many people again tuning in right now that are from other parts of the world. So if you're in Canada or in Brazil right now and you want to help to conserve tigers, what can you do from home? And including donations, please, include that as
okay. Yeah, donations. Yeah, absolutely. Everyone wants money. There's never enough money. Make sure that if you want to get involved physically, get involved. I mean, like I said, it's not just a world for biologists. It's a place for sociologists, people with skills in working with local communities, economists, geographers, etc. So if you're a young person out there wanting to get into tiger conservation, don't just feel that you have to go and study animals and that's it. There's lots of scope. The third thing I would say is choose your palm oil and other products sensibly. Make sure it's from a sustainable source. And the fourth thing I would say is actually tigers are just an example. Like I said, this species, habitats, and people, it works for a number of different animals. So the same could be for bears, making sure if you're doing bear conservation, species conservation with bears, habitat conservation working with people is a key element, making sure you touch on all three of those things.
Fantastic. Sugoto, I know we could talk all day about tigers. We're getting close to the end of the session, so what I want to make sure we get a chance to do is, where can people go to learn more about the work that you're doing?
The IUCN website. I'll send a link to you guys and then you can circulate it later on.
Fantastic. We'd love that. We'll share that on social media for everyone tuning in at home. And we so appreciate you joining us today to share your story. This was really inspiring.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Sugoto.
Thank you.